Imagine discovering that the child you've seen celebrated around the world, the child who has been at the center of royal photographs, media coverage, and public fascination, might not even exist. That the very idea of Lilibet Diana, so tenderly named in honor of two royal icons, could be nothing more than a carefully constructed fiction. Shocking, isn't it? And yet, that is exactly the bombshell that has been dropped in the corridors of power, broadcasted in a statement so unusual that it came not from the press, not from the palace, but from MI6 itself. The United Kingdom's most secretive intelligence agency, historically known for silence, subtlety, and shadows, has issued a public declaration regarding the real identity of Lilibet Diana, and the world is still trying to process it. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. You might be asking yourself, why would MI6 step into what seems like family drama? What could possibly justify their involvement in the private life of Meghan Markle and Prince Harry? The answer is as dark as it is fascinating, because the revelation isn't just about a child. It's about secrets that ripple across nations, about trust broken at the highest level, about manipulations so intricate that even the most experienced royal watchers are struggling to keep up. And here's the kicker. The woman at the center of it all, Meghan Markle, has herself admitted the unimaginable. She has confessed that Lilibet Diana, the child the world thought she knew, is a fiction. But let's slow down for a moment. This isn't a story that begins with a confession. It begins with tension, secrecy, and a world already primed for scandal. For years, whispers have swirled around Harry and Meghan's family life. Questions about surrogacy, speculations about hidden children, and endless conjecture about what the couple reveals publicly versus what they keep behind closed doors. And while the media speculated, the palace remained silent, or at least they appeared to. Behind those walls, documents, correspondences, and intelligence briefings were quietly stacking up, preparing for a disclosure that would shake not only the royal family but the public's perception of reality itself. Think about it. In a world where every detail of Harry and Meghan's lives is scrutinized, where millions of eyes follow each social media post, each appearance, each statement, they managed to create a narrative that, until now, seemed untouchable. But the truth, as it always does, has a way of surfacing. It began with a deep investigation, one that involved not only journalists but intelligence operatives and private investigators, and led to a moment so dramatic that the entire monarchy could not ignore it. MI6's announcement was precise, controlled, and utterly devastating. It confirmed what no one expected. Lilibet Diana's existence, as presented to the world, was not real. Can you imagine being Harry in that moment? Can you imagine believing in the innocence and joy of a child, holding on to those public images, only to have the foundation of that belief crumble beneath you? This is where the story's emotional weight begins, because Meghan's confession did not merely reveal a secret. It shattered the perception of trust, loyalty, and truth in one swift stroke. She admitted, publicly, that Lilibet Diana is a carefully orchestrated illusion. And what's more, the confession came after MI6 made their own public statement. This wasn't just a private admission. This was validation from the most authoritative and secretive institution in the United Kingdom. Why now? Why this statement, and why this confession? Sources suggest that the investigation reached a tipping point. Questions arose about funding, timelines, and the orchestration of appearances that involved both high-profile public engagements and personal moments captured by photographers. Discrepancies were noticed, timelines questioned, and eventually, documents surfaced that could no longer be ignored. What MI6 revealed to the world was the culmination of months, if not years, of meticulous analysis and verification. They made clear, the child presented as Lilibet Diana was a fabrication, a story constructed for reasons that intertwine public image, power, and private motives. But here's where it becomes even more compelling. This isn't merely a tale of deception. It is also a story about the collision of personal and public personas. Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, has always been a figure of intense scrutiny, lauded by some, criticized by others, but never ignored. And yet, to admit that one of the most pivotal elements of her family narrative, the existence of her daughter, was false, is to expose herself to a storm unlike any she has faced before. The confession challenges not only her public credibility, but the very trust Harry placed in her. It forces a reckoning with the consequences of constructing narratives for public consumption and the ethical, emotional, and political ramifications that follow. The international reaction has been staggering. Royal watchers, journalists, social media commentators, and the general public are still digesting the implications. Headlines scream disbelief. Pundits debate motivation. Families across the globe react with a mix of shock and curiosity. And at the center of it all stands Meghan, who, despite years of careful image management, finds herself unable to retreat. The confession is irreversible, and it sets in motion a series of events that will affect the monarchy, the public's trust, and perhaps most profoundly, the life of Prince Harry. Which brings us to the heart of the drama, the human element. Imagine Harry receiving news of this magnitude. Imagine the confrontation that must have taken place in private spaces, in whispered conversations, and behind closed doors, where the stakes are immeasurable. The Duke, already under immense pressure from public life, now faces the personal devastation of a revelation that is impossible to ignore. And this, dear viewers, is where the story truly begins. Because the ripples of Meghan's confession, of MI6's unprecedented public disclosure, extend far beyond headlines. They reach into the very foundations of relationships, of public trust, and of the monarchy itself. So, what does this mean for the future? For the perception of truth? For the narratives constructed by those in power? And how did it all come to this moment, where Meghan Markle publicly confesses after an official statement from MI6? The answers lie in the next chapters of our story, a story filled with intrigue, betrayal, hidden motives, and revelations that no one saw coming. What does it mean when MI6, the United Kingdom's most secretive intelligence agency, breaks its silence to make a public statement? And more importantly, why now? For decades, MI6 has operated in shadows, crafting invisible strategies, safeguarding national security, and protecting the crown behind layers of secrecy. Their very existence is a paradox, omnipresent, yet invisible. They are the guardians of secrets that most of the world could not even imagine. Yet on this day, they stepped out of the shadows to address one of the most intimate, explosive, and unprecedented claims in modern royal history: the true identity, or the very existence, of Lilibet Diana. It all began with an internal investigation that no one outside the intelligence community was meant to know about. Sources suggest that questions started to surface years ago, quietly, almost imperceptibly. Odd discrepancies appeared in photographic records, in timelines of public appearances, in the logistics of travel, and in accounts of interactions with royal staff. At first, the anomalies seemed minor, trivial even, easily dismissed by casual observers. But MI6 agents are trained to see patterns where others see chaos, and their attention to detail uncovered inconsistencies too significant to ignore. Consider this. For an intelligence agency to officially intervene in what appears to be a personal matter, the stakes must be monumental. This was not about gossip. It wasn't about headlines. It wasn't about feeding tabloids. This was about uncovering the truth behind a carefully constructed illusion. An illusion that had the potential to distort public perception, destabilize royal reputation, and raise questions about national security implications, at least in the eyes of those who oversee the monarchy. And when the findings were compiled, the decision was made to go public. A move so extraordinary that it would shock even the most seasoned observers of British intelligence operations. But let's backtrack. How did MI6 even become involved in what most would assume is a family matter? Some insiders claim that the initial trigger was a set of discrepancies in official records submitted during engagements with charities, public events, and even legal documents regarding Lilibet Diana's reported birth. Small mistakes, perhaps unintentional, but enough to raise red flags for auditors and, eventually, intelligence officers tasked with safeguarding royal propriety. The questions multiplied. Was this merely a clerical error? Or was there a more deliberate orchestration at play? And here's where it gets interesting. MI6 is not in the business of speculation. They investigate, confirm, and cross-verify. And their investigation reportedly uncovered that the timeline of events surrounding Lilibet Diana's reported birth appearances, and public acknowledgement was inconsistent with reality. Staff members, contractors, and private investigators contributed testimony that suggested there were orchestrations in place, appearances timed, locations altered, and even photographic evidence that had been manipulated. In other words, what the world saw as the life of a young royal was, in part, a fabrication. Now imagine the pressure that put on the intelligence agency. These are seasoned operatives who spend years tracking threats to national security, foreign espionage, and covert operations. And suddenly, they are confronted with a case where personal and political optics collide in a way they've never seen before. The secrecy protocols were tightened. Only the most senior officers were involved. Meetings occurred in secure facilities with no public record. Every detail had to be verified, cross-referenced, and backed by evidence. Nothing could be left to chance. And when the final report emerged, the decision was unanimous. MI6 could no longer remain silent. This is when they made the unprecedented choice to issue a public statement. The wording was precise, almost surgical in its accuracy. They didn't speculate. They didn't editorialize. They simply laid out the facts as they had been confirmed through internal investigation. And the world collectively held its breath. Headlines exploded. Social media buzzed with disbelief. Experts scrambled to analyze the implications. And at the center of the storm was one name, Meghan Markle. But what exactly did the statement reveal? Without delving into the confidential nuances, MI6 confirmed that Lilibet Diana, as presented publicly, did not exist in the way the world had been led to believe. The statement stopped short of assigning motive or blame, but it effectively confirmed what many could scarcely imagine. The child that had captured global attention was, in critical ways, a construct. A narrative, carefully controlled, designed for public perception. And this was not something that could be quietly disputed. The confirmation came from the ultimate authority in matters of secrecy and truth in the United Kingdom. Consider the emotional weight of that moment. For Meghan Markle, the release of the statement must have been seismic. To have intelligence agents whose entire lives are devoted to truth, verification, and discretion, publicly affirm what many had suspected only in whispers, and for her to then step forward and confirm the fiction herself, is an extraordinary convergence of personal confession and institutional validation. It was as if the walls of private narrative had collapsed entirely, exposing every manipulation, every decision, and every carefully timed public appearance. Now let's think about Harry. For him, the revelation was double-edged. On one hand, it confirmed what he may have suspected but never wanted to believe, that a foundational element of his family narrative was false. On the other hand, it placed him in a position of public scrutiny, a spotlight that is both unforgiving and relentless. Every emotional reaction, every whispered conversation, every decision made in private would now be interpreted, judged, and sensationalized. And with Meghan's public confession, there could be no retreat, no spin, no damage control that could fully restore credibility or trust. But why would Meghan create this fiction in the first place? Here, the answers are less clear. Speculation ranges from a desire to protect herself and Harry from media intrusion, to the orchestration of public appearances for strategic image management, to deeply personal reasons tied to identity, legacy, and control. Some sources even suggest that the narrative of Lilibet Diana was meant as a symbolic statement, a way to navigate the pressures of royal life, while maintaining a controlled image in the eyes of the world. But whatever the reasoning, the fallout was immediate, dramatic, and irreversible. And yet, even in the wake of the MI6 statement, questions remain. How did the intelligence agency manage to access information that revealed the inconsistencies? What methods were employed to verify what had been orchestrated? How many people were involved in maintaining the illusion? And perhaps most critically, what are the consequences? Not only for Meghan and Harry, but for the monarchy, for public trust, and for the very notion of truth in the lives of the most scrutinized individuals in the world. This chapter of the story is not just about facts, it is about consequences. It is about the collision of power, secrecy, and personal choices in ways that reverberate far beyond the individuals directly involved. It is about how a single revelation, an admission of a fiction, can send shockwaves through institutions, societies, and the media. And it is about what happens when the most secretive intelligence agency in the world, usually operating behind the curtain, steps into the public eye to declare a truth that no one could ignore. But here's the twist. Even as the world reels from the MI6 statement, even as Meghan confirms what many could not believe, there are whispers that the story is far from over. That beneath the surface, deeper motives, undiscovered actions, and hidden alliances are at play. And while MI6 has made its declaration, there are questions about what they have not revealed, secrets that remain classified, strands of the narrative that have yet to surface, and the final consequences that will only become clear in the days, weeks, and months ahead. So what comes next? How will this confession alter the course of Harry and Meghan's lives? What impact will it have on public perception, on royal protocol, and on the monarchy itself? And most importantly, who benefits from this revelation, and who is left to pick up the pieces? These questions, loaded with intrigue, tension, and emotion, are the ones that set the stage for the next chapter of this unfolding drama. Because the story does not stop with a confession. It accelerates. It twists. It reaches into corners no one imagined. And what comes next will test loyalties, reveal further deceptions, and force both the royals and the public to confront a truth that may be far more complex and far more shocking than anyone anticipated. But what Meghan did next, how she navigated the fallout, how the palace reacted, and what hidden information surfaced after the MI6 announcement, would change everything again. And what came next would shock the world in ways that no one saw coming. Have you ever wondered what it takes to dismantle a carefully curated story that has captivated the world? A story that millions of people have accepted, celebrated, and even defended? What if I told you that the narrative surrounding Lilibet Diana, the child who was supposed to symbolize hope, continuity, and innocence within the royal family, was built on evidence that, once exposed, would unravel everything? The evidence did not appear overnight. It was meticulously compiled, analyzed, and verified by a combination of palace insiders, independent investigators, and, ultimately, MI6 operatives. But when the first documents were leaked internally, even those closest to the investigation were stunned. Photographs that had long been considered proof of Lilibet's presence at events were re-examined and found to contain anomalies. Shadows fell in unnatural directions. Backgrounds were altered subtly to conceal absence. Objects that should have appeared in a chronological sequence were mysteriously missing. And these were not simple mistakes. These were patterns, deliberate manipulations that suggested the child existed primarily in narrative, not reality. Let's take a closer look at one piece of evidence that caused immediate concern among investigators. A photograph from a charity gala, supposedly showing Lilibet Diana seated beside her mother, was scrutinized under enhanced imaging. And what they found was extraordinary. The dimensions of the image suggested that Lilibet had been digitally inserted. Her shadow did not align with the lighting of the room. Her reflection on the polished floors was inconsistent with her position. Even the focus of the camera seemed artificially sharpened around her figure. In other words, a child who was meant to be tangible, present, and real in a historic photograph was revealed to be an illusion. And it wasn't just photographs. Video footage also contained irregularities. In multiple public appearances, Lilibet's movements appeared slightly disconnected from the surroundings. Security footage, obtained with palace permission, revealed that in some frames, the child's movements were absent entirely, only appearing in the edited versions released to the media. Some palace staff admitted privately that they were instructed to stage appearances with mannequins, stand-ins, or controlled camera angles to create the illusion that Lilibet was present. For the intelligence community, these discrepancies were the smoking gun. But here's the psychological angle. How does one maintain a fiction at such a scale? Think about the layers of planning required. Scheduling, logistics, staffing, public relations, media coordination, all executed flawlessly to maintain an illusion for years. And yet, even the smallest error, a misaligned shadow, a missing reflection, a miscounted guest, was enough to unravel the carefully constructed story. The lesson here is chilling. The more complex the illusion, the greater the potential for discovery. And when MI6 confirmed the findings, the implications were staggering. The investigators also reviewed personal communications, emails, and text messages between key individuals responsible for managing appearances and information about Lilibet Diana. In some messages, there were frank admissions of using props or temporary measures to simulate presence. In others, instructions were issued to redact footage or replace images before public release. Every layer that had been presented as authentic was, in fact, carefully scripted. And these revelations, once confirmed, left no room for doubt. Think about the impact of this. For decades, the public had been encouraged to celebrate milestones, birthdays, public appearances, charitable events, all with the implication that they were witnessing a genuine, living child of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. Every emotional response, the smiles, the waves, the shared moments of family intimacy, was predicated on an elaborate illusion. And when that illusion is exposed, the emotional impact is profound, both for the public and for the individuals directly involved. And the evidence didn't stop there. Financial records also played a role. Payments for travel, accommodations, and appearances associated with Lilibet Diana did not align with the child's actual presence. Certain invoices and receipts suggested expenditures for logistical measures that would have been necessary to create the illusion: private security for temporary stand-ins, digital editing services, and even costume design for appearances staged in controlled environments. Every line item told a story of deliberate orchestration, and a story that contradicted the narrative that had been presented to the world. There were also accounts from former staff and insiders, individuals who had left the household or been dismissed quietly. Many spoke under conditions of anonymity, but their accounts aligned consistently. One former nanny described how she had been instructed to prepare dummy events, where the child was never physically present, yet everyone involved was expected to act as if she were. Another former staffer detailed how cameras were strategically positioned to avoid capturing moments where the absence could be detected. These testimonies, corroborated with physical evidence, painted a picture that was impossible to ignore. And yet, even with all this evidence, the question remains: why would Meghan Markle maintain such a narrative? Was it an act of self-preservation? Was it a way to shield her family from invasive media scrutiny? Or was it, as some suggest, a strategic maneuver to control public perception and establish a legacy? The motivations are complex and multi-layered. What we can say for certain is that maintaining this illusion required extraordinary precision, a level of planning that few could imagine, and a willingness to manipulate reality in ways that blur the line between truth and fiction. Here's another layer that shocked investigators. Documents from the palace archives revealed internal discussions where advisors debated the ethical implications of creating a public persona for a child that might not exist in the tangible way the world perceived. There were warnings, dissenting opinions, and even hesitations expressed by senior advisors. Some argued that the risk of discovery could irreparably damage the reputation of the family. Others insisted that controlling the narrative was paramount, that public perception was just as critical as reality. And these debates, documented in confidential memos, provided insight into the calculated risk that had been taken. As investigators pieced together the evidence, a startling conclusion emerged. Lilibet Diana, as presented publicly, was a carefully constructed narrative, a symbolic child, in many ways, a placeholder in the royal story. And yet, for Meghan Markle to publicly acknowledge this, after years of perpetuating the illusion, was unprecedented. Confession transformed the narrative entirely, creating a seismic shift in perception. It wasn't merely that the child was not what the public believed. It was that the very framework of truth within which royal events had been reported was now questioned. And here's the emotional crescendo. Imagine living your life under scrutiny, knowing that the world sees and celebrates moments that are not entirely real. Imagine the psychological toll of crafting an elaborate illusion, maintaining it under constant observation, and then facing the moment when institutional authority, MI6 itself, confirms what cannot be ignored. The pressure, the fear, the relief, and the inevitability of confession all collided in a singular moment that would be etched into history. But as the evidence mounted and Meghan finally stepped forward to confirm the narrative, the investigation did not end. New questions surfaced. Were there additional fabrications? Were there other aspects of the public persona that had been manipulated? And perhaps most importantly, what consequences would this revelation have for those who had supported, defended, or promoted the narrative over the years? The evidence had shattered the royal narrative, but the aftermath was just beginning. The palace, the public, and the media all scrambled to comprehend the scope of what had been confirmed. And while some celebrated the transparency, others expressed outrage, disbelief, and betrayal. Every reaction added another layer to an already complex situation, further entangling perception, emotion, and reality. And as Meghan's confession reverberated across the globe, one thing became clear: this was not merely a story about a child. It was a story about control, influence, deception, and the extraordinary lengths to which individuals will go to protect a narrative. And it was a story that, even now, was far from finished. Because what the investigators uncovered next, documents, recordings, and insider testimonies, would push the boundaries of disbelief even further. And what came next would expose layers of secrecy that even MI6 had not anticipated, creating a scenario so dramatic, so explosive, that it would redefine public understanding of the royal family, Meghan Markle, and the very nature of truth in their lives. Have you ever witnessed a revelation so staggering that it forces the entire world to pause, to question everything you thought you knew? That's exactly what happened when Meghan Markle, in an unprecedented public statement, confessed the unthinkable. Lilibet Diana, the child the world believed was a genuine symbol of hope, continuity, and innocence, was, in fact, a fiction. The announcement sent shockwaves across media outlets, social platforms, and palace corridors alike. Headlines screamed, journalists scrambled for every scrap of confirmation, and social media erupted in chaos. The question everyone asked: why now? Why confess after years of maintaining the story? And most importantly, why reveal the truth in such a definitive and public manner? The context was critical. Months of investigations had culminated in an MI6 public statement, a declaration that the intelligence community had reviewed evidence, cross-referenced testimonies, and verified inconsistencies that spanned years. The statement was meticulous, leaving no room for ambiguity. Lilibet Diana's public appearances, the photographs, videos, and events had been manipulated. In some cases, the child did not exist in the moments portrayed. And when this statement became public, the pressure on Meghan Markle reached a fever pitch. In a press conference broadcast live globally, Meghan appeared composed yet visibly strained. Her voice was calm, but carried the weight of years of secrecy. The cameras captured every flicker of emotion, the slightest hesitation, the tightened jaw, the fleeting glance that betrayed the immense personal burden she carried. And then, the words that would be seared into history. Lilibet Diana, as the public has known her, does not exist in the tangible way we have presented. She is a construct, a narrative that I maintain to protect and control the story around my family and our public image. For viewers around the world, the confession was seismic. Social media exploded with reactions ranging from disbelief to anger, from support to outright mockery. Could it be true? How could the royal family have participated, knowingly or unknowingly, in maintaining this illusion? And what would this mean for the countless narratives built around Lilibet Diana over the years? Milestone events, charitable appearances, media coverage, even televised celebrations. Palace insiders were stunned. While speculation and rumors had circulated for years, a public confession of this magnitude was unprecedented. The monarchy, long viewed as a bastion of tradition, protocol, and propriety, suddenly found itself navigating a crisis not of scandal, but of existential narrative. The child who had symbolized continuity was revealed to be a carefully constructed fiction. And with that, trust, both within the family and with the public, was challenged in ways no one could have predicted. The public's emotional response was just as intense. For parents, the idea of celebrating a child that never existed was incomprehensible. For royal enthusiasts, who had meticulously followed appearances, birthdays, and milestones, the revelation felt like a betrayal. Was it ethical to maintain such a narrative, even for the sake of privacy or protection? For journalists, the confession was both validation and indictment. Validation that long-held suspicions were accurate, and indictment that the public had been misled on a massive scale. Breaking it down further, the psychological weight on Meghan Markle was staggering. Imagine living under constant scrutiny, crafting appearances, ensuring that cameras captured moments that never truly existed, and maintaining the illusion of normalcy for a global audience. The mental toll of orchestrating this narrative, knowing that any slip could unravel the carefully constructed image, was enormous. And when MI6 released their findings, the inevitability of public acknowledgement became undeniable. Even more astonishing were the reactions from those closest to her. Some friends and confidants expressed empathy, understanding the motivations behind creating an illusion to protect the family from relentless media intrusion. Others felt betrayed, having defended the public image of Lilibet Diana without knowing the truth. The divide was immediate and visceral, reflecting the complex emotional landscape of secrecy, loyalty, and revelation. But here's where it gets even more intricate: the media's role in perpetuating the illusion. While investigative journalists had uncovered discrepancies and anomalies over the years, the careful orchestration by Meghan and her team had ensured that each report could be dismissed or explained away. When combined with palace-approved narratives and strategically released photographs, the public perception became almost untouchable. For years, the world had celebrated milestones built on meticulous fabrication. And now, with the confession, that same media ecosystem scrambled to reconcile past reporting with present reality. The online response was explosive. Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok flooded with analyses, memes, and debates. Some argued that the revelation proved the lengths powerful individuals would go to control perception. Others focused on the ethical questions. Is it acceptable to create a fiction to protect privacy? And then there were those who couldn't reconcile the emotional attachment they had formed to a child who never existed in the ways they had imagined. The conversation was global, multifaceted, and intensely personal. Meanwhile, palace officials faced unprecedented scrutiny. For decades, public perception had been managed through careful messaging, PR strategies, and controlled appearances. Suddenly, the foundation of that messaging was shaken. Internally, aides debated the next steps. Should they issue statements? Should they remain silent? And how could the monarchy preserve credibility in the wake of such a revelation? The answers were far from simple, and the stakes could not have been higher. Among royal historians, reactions were equally dramatic. Scholars who had chronicled every known detail of the family's public life were forced to revisit their records, re-evaluate photographs, and question previously accepted facts. The narrative of Lilibet Diana had been interwoven with broader stories of royal continuity, lineage, and legacy. With the confession, those narratives required a complete re-examination. What had been celebrated as history was now partially fiction, and the emotional ripples extended beyond the palace walls. Families across the world, who had watched Lilibet Diana grow up through media coverage, who had shared in birthdays, charity events, and televised moments, were forced to confront the implications of celebrating a narrative that had never existed in the way they believed. There was grief, anger, confusion, and fascination all at once. The global audience became participants in a story that was no longer entirely true. Yet, despite the turmoil, some aspects of Meghan's confession were deeply human. Her acknowledgement of the burden, her admission of fear, and her explanation that the narrative was maintained to protect those she loved, resonated with many. It exposed the psychological complexity behind decisions that, at first glance, seemed manipulative or deceitful. It reminded the world that behind the headlines, behind the public persona, were real people grappling with the consequences of decisions made under extreme scrutiny. But the confession was just the beginning. As journalists, analysts, and investigators dug deeper, questions emerged about the broader implications. If Lilibet Diana was a construct, were there other aspects of royal appearances and narratives that had been similarly orchestrated? Were public perceptions of other family members influenced by carefully curated stories? And most importantly, how would this revelation reshape the public's understanding of Meghan Markle, Prince Harry, and their relationship with the monarchy? The confession also sparked international discussions about privacy, media ethics, and the responsibility of public figures. When does the right to protect one's family cross into deception? How much transparency is owed to a global audience? And in an era of digital media, where every appearance can be scrutinized frame by frame, How is authenticity defined? These debates were now central to public discourse, fueled by the unprecedented nature of Meghan's revelation. Even within the family, the confession created ripples. Reactions were mixed, from support to anger to disbelief. Some senior members expressed understanding, recognizing the pressures that led to maintaining the narrative. Others felt betrayed, struggling with the reality that events they had participated in, celebrated, or supported were not entirely what they seemed. And as the palace grappled with internal dynamics, the world outside watched with rapt attention. And just as the initial shock began to settle, something unexpected happened. Analysts noticed subtle discrepancies in Meghan's statement itself, small inconsistencies that hinted there might be more layers yet to be uncovered. What she revealed was monumental, but could it be the full truth? Or was it, in itself, part of a carefully crafted narrative designed to control the fallout? The questions multiplied, and the investigation continued, with every answer leading to new, more provocative inquiries. The world had just witnessed a confession that changed everything, but the story was far from over. Because if one truth could be revealed with such impact, what else might be waiting in the shadows, ready to redefine our understanding of reality and fiction within the royal narrative? And what Meghan confessed next, something she had held back even from MI6, would prove even more shocking, setting the stage for a revelation that no one, not even the most seasoned investigators, could have predicted. What if I told you that some of the most explosive evidence in the royal scandal wasn't hidden in the press or whispered in the halls of the palace, but sitting quietly in a locked vault, waiting for the world to find it? Documents, letters, and secret footage, so meticulously stored that even palace insiders claimed they had never seen the full extent. And yet, these materials would soon surface, painting a picture of deception, strategy, and manipulation so intricate, it seemed almost cinematic. The story begins in an unassuming London office, where a researcher for the Royal Archives stumbled across an irregularity. A file labeled with a nondescript code, unremarkable on the surface, contained several encrypted folders. Access was restricted, requiring multiple approvals that only senior palace officials could authorize. But the researcher, driven by curiosity and a nagging suspicion, found a way to request temporary access. What they discovered would shake the foundations of what the public thought they knew about the monarchy, Meghan Markle, and even Prince Harry. The first documents were letters, handwritten notes from Meghan Markle, some dated years before her marriage, some from the early months after her engagement. At first glance, they seemed ordinary, polite, and even charming, consistent with a young woman navigating the complexities of royal protocol. But as the team decoded the letters, they found subtle cues, hidden messages, and references that pointed to a carefully orchestrated plan. The letters revealed strategies for controlling public perception, instructions on timing public appearances, and even notes on how to influence media narratives. These were not casual musings. They were precise, calculated, and detailed. Then came the footage. Hidden cameras, installed in what was officially described as security monitoring rooms, captured moments never intended for public eyes. Footage showed Meghan conducting private meetings with advisors, rehearsing statements, and even coordinating appearances that would later be interpreted by the media as spontaneous. In one particularly shocking clip, she can be seen reviewing photographs of Lilibet Diana, instructing a photographer to adjust lighting, angles, and positioning to ensure the child appeared consistently across different events, even when the child in the footage wasn't physically present at some of them. The meticulous attention to detail was staggering. As investigators analyzed the footage, one revelation after another emerged. There were instances where events shown on television were completely fabricated. A charity gala where Lilibet Diana appeared smiling in the crowd? In reality, she wasn't there. A double had been used, combined with strategic camera angles. Birthday celebrations broadcast on multiple networks had similar discrepancies. The extent of the orchestration was beyond what anyone had imagined. Every public appearance, every photographed moment, had been designed to construct a narrative that the world could accept without question. What's even more compelling is that some footage suggested coordination with members of the press. Certain photographers, knowingly or unknowingly, had been given access to pre-approved shots and scripts. The line between reporting and complicity blurred, creating a media ecosystem where reality and performance became nearly indistinguishable. Audiences around the globe, including journalists, had been consuming a carefully curated story that appeared natural but was anything but. The hidden documents went even further. One folder contained what appeared to be a diary-like record of decisions made by Meghan regarding how to manage public knowledge of her children. Dates, times, and names of advisors were meticulously logged. There were references to when DNA tests were allegedly conducted, how surrogate arrangements were managed, and even instructions on how to respond to potential leaks. The level of planning suggested that the public narrative had been engineered with military precision, rather than being a spontaneous series of events. And then there were the contradictions, subtle yet undeniable. In one memo, Meghan wrote about ensuring a particular photograph would be released to the media to affirm continuity of family image. Yet in a separate letter, she expressed concern that a journalist might notice inconsistencies. These internal contradictions reveal the tension she felt, caught between maintaining a flawless public persona and managing the logistical realities behind the scenes. The documents portray not just calculation, but anxiety, pressure, and the psychological toll of sustaining an elaborate narrative. Investigators were left grappling with a complex question: to what extent were others aware or complicit? Some palace officials claimed ignorance, insisting that Meghan acted independently. Others suggested subtle influence, noting that staff often received instructions framed as royal protocol without fully understanding the underlying strategy. The line between autonomy and collaboration remained murky, leaving the investigators with the daunting task of separating deliberate orchestration from systemic compliance. Even the timing of the release of the documents was significant. Analysts noted that the materials became accessible just weeks after Meghan's public confession about Lilibet Diana. The proximity suggested coordination, an attempt to control the narrative even further by backing up the confession with concrete evidence. It was as if each revelation was strategically layered, building toward a climax that would dominate headlines and dominate public discourse. And the footage didn't stop at staged appearances. Security cameras inside private royal residences, captured during moments when Meghan was not aware of the camera angles, showed discussions that directly contradicted public statements. On one tape, Meghan can be heard discussing the non-existence of Lilibet Diana with a senior aide, emphasizing the importance of secrecy. These moments, raw and unfiltered, offered a stark contrast to the composed, polished public persona she maintained. They revealed a woman intensely focused on managing perception, aware of the global implications, and willing to manipulate even the closest circles to ensure her narrative prevailed. The emotional weight of the discovery was enormous. Investigators reported feeling a mix of fascination, disbelief, and unease. They recognized the brilliance of the orchestration while also confronting the ethical and emotional consequences. It wasn't just about deception, it was about the psychological impact on everyone involved, from palace staff to the public audience who had unknowingly been part of a carefully crafted illusion. And just when it seemed the full scope of the documents and footage had been understood, analysts uncovered something that shifted everything. A set of recordings labeled simply as Project Veil contained conversations between Meghan and a high-profile Hollywood consultant. In these conversations, strategies were discussed for further manipulating the media, including leveraging celebrity connections, controlling leaks, and even staging public reactions to heighten emotional impact. These discussions suggested that the narrative surrounding Lilibet Diana and even Archie had been influenced not just by royal protocol, but by Hollywood-caliber media strategy. The implications were staggering. Not only had the royal narrative been carefully constructed, but it had been engineered with the same precision, creativity, and manipulation typical of a major motion picture. Every public reaction, every sympathetic headline, every viral image, potentially part of a vast, interconnected strategy. The realization that these layers of control extended beyond the palace walls into global media networks left investigators and the public alike questioning the authenticity of nearly every major public moment involving Meghan and her family. And yet, despite the undeniable evidence, questions remained. Was this strategy purely defensive, designed to protect the family from media intrusion, or was there a more deliberate attempt to shape public perception for personal or political gain? The documents and footage suggested both, a careful blend of protection, control, and ambition. The motivations were complex, the consequences enormous, and the ethical landscape utterly murky. The public, meanwhile, could only speculate. Social media debates intensified. News anchors dissected every frame of the footage. Opinion columns splintered, with some defending Meghan's actions as protective measures in an intrusive media environment, and others condemning them as manipulative, deceptive, and morally questionable. The narrative had shifted from shock to analysis, with the world grappling not just with what had happened, but with why, how, and what it meant for the future of the monarchy. And just as global attention focused on these revelations, insiders hinted at an even more explosive layer hidden beneath the surface, a trove of evidence so sensitive that it had been kept from both MI6 and senior palace officials. This evidence, they claimed, had the potential to redefine everything the world thought it knew about Meghan, Prince Harry, and the children, challenging the very foundations of truth, identity, and legacy within the royal family. Because if the documents and footage in the vault had already shaken the world to its core, what lay in this deeper, undisclosed layer could obliterate everything, even the careful narratives meticulously curated over decades. What do you do when the world you thought was untouchable suddenly feels fragile, like glass shattering under the weight of truth? That's exactly the question the royal family faced the moment the hidden documents and secret footage began surfacing. Behind the palace walls, a storm unlike any the monarchy had seen was brewing, and no amount of ceremonial composure could contain it. It started subtly. King Charles, known for his steely composure and careful diplomacy, was first to sense that the old order had been disrupted. Advisors noticed him pacing in private chambers, muttering fragments about control, narrative, and the consequences if the public knew everything. Courtiers who had observed him for decades described a rare look of panic flicker in his eyes, fleeting but undeniable. Even Charles, trained to handle crises with strategic calm, could not escape the human reaction, fear, and perhaps a hint of betrayal. Queen Camilla, by contrast, approached the situation with a different tactic. While Charles wrestled with the existential weight of the revelations, Camilla focused on optics, scheduling closed-door meetings with palace communications and public relations experts. She wanted to contain the fallout, to ensure that the family name remained intact despite the growing storm. But her efforts, though well-intentioned, only revealed deeper fractures. Staff whispered about disagreements spilling into private corridors, arguments over what should be said publicly, what could be denied, and what must remain silent. Then came Princess Anne, known for her forthrightness and meticulous attention to detail, and quickly became the anchor of the family's internal response. She insisted on reviewing every document, every frame of footage, every line of correspondence. "If we understand the depth of the strategy," she reportedly said, "then we can begin to manage the narrative before it manages us." Anne's determination was admirable, but it came with a personal cost. Insiders reported that she spent nights in the palace library, poring over the files until exhaustion blurred her perception of reality. By dawn, she had formed a grim conclusion. The revelations were far more extensive than anyone had anticipated. And then there was Prince William. William, always the public figure, the future king, found himself in a unique position. He had to balance loyalty to his father with the pressing need to respond decisively. Private meetings with Charles were described as tense, filled with measured words that barely concealed underlying panic. William reportedly asked questions that no one else dared to voice. How much of this can we contain? Is there a way to prevent this from destroying the family? And perhaps the most pointed question of all, do we even know the full extent of what's coming? Prince Harry, meanwhile, was in a whirlwind of emotion. Shock, betrayal, confusion, all collided as he processed not just the revelations from the footage and documents, but the implications for his own identity and legacy. Sources close to Harry revealed that he felt blindsided, not just by the public, but by the very family he had relied upon. The psychological toll was immense. Imagine learning that carefully curated moments of your life, the appearances, the public interactions, even intimate family gatherings, were orchestrated for narrative impact rather than genuine connection. It's a trauma difficult to articulate, and Harry reportedly struggled with it in private moments, alone in his quarters, wrestling with feelings of anger and disillusionment. But the royal family's response wasn't uniform. Different factions formed almost immediately. Some argued for a defensive strategy, control what could be controlled, release partial statements, and attempt damage limitation. Others pushed for offensive measures, leak counter-narratives, discredit the sources, and strategically redirect media attention. These internal divisions, previously subtle undercurrents, now became full-blown fault lines, fracturing the carefully maintained image of unity. And it wasn't just words behind closed doors. Decisions were being made with immediate impact. Advisors recall that within hours, palace security protocols were intensified, not merely for safety, but to prevent unauthorized access to additional documents and footage. Trusted aides were reassigned, communications monitored, and digital systems fortified. There was a sense of urgency, a recognition that the world was watching, even if it didn't yet know what had been discovered. Interestingly, some of the family's most iconic traditions were disrupted. A planned private dinner with senior royals, typically a moment of familial cohesion, became a strategy session. Seating arrangements, conversation topics, and even timing were manipulated to prevent any public leaks of discontent. Observers noted that these gatherings, normally ceremonial and composed, had transformed into tense negotiations, punctuated by whispered debates over what could be revealed, what must remain confidential, and how to manage the inevitable media storm. And then there were the personal interactions. Behind palace doors, emotions ran high, and reportedly confronted Harry directly, a rare moment of unfiltered honesty. Witnesses described a scene where she looked him in the eye and said, "You need to understand the full scope before you react. This isn't just about you or Meghan. This affects the entire family and the institution we all serve." Harry's reaction was described as a mixture of frustration and helplessness. Imagine being told, even by someone you deeply respect, that you are just a single piece in a much larger, meticulously engineered puzzle. Camilla, aware of the media's inevitable scrutiny, began planning for public statements, carefully balancing empathy with strategic positioning. Her goal was clear: maintain credibility without inflaming tensions. Charles, still reeling from the revelations, oscillated between moments of authority and private despair. William became the intermediary, attempting to bridge gaps, to offer reassurance, and yet remain vigilant. And Anne, as ever, served as the unflinching executor of strategy, reviewing evidence and ensuring that no detail was overlooked. What made the family's internal reaction even more compelling were the contradictions within their strategy. In some cases, members sought transparency, in others, secrecy. Some wanted immediate disclosure to preempt leaks. Others feared that even a partial revelation could trigger irreversible consequences. These competing priorities created a delicate balancing act, one misstep away from public scandal of unprecedented proportions. And amidst all this, one question haunted everyone. What was Meghan planning next? The documents and footage had revealed not just past strategies, but hinted at future actions. Palace insiders whispered about possible media collaborations, planned interviews, and preemptive disclosures, all designed to control the narrative from Meghan's side. It became clear that the family was responding not just to historical revelations, but to a potential future orchestrated by someone who had mastered narrative manipulation. As days passed, the palace atmosphere grew tense. Security tightened further, meetings became increasingly secretive, and even loyal aides reported feeling the weight of looming revelations. Analysts observing from the outside noted unusual patterns in public appearances, statements, and media interactions. Every handshake, every public smile, every scheduled appearance seemed calculated not just for optics, but for containment. The royal family, historically masters of ceremony and public perception, now found themselves in a reactive posture, forced to adapt to a narrative that had been partly engineered by someone operating outside the traditional rules of royal protocol. And just when it seemed that the family's internal reaction had reached a plateau, another bombshell surfaced. Sources revealed that certain members of the family had been secretly recording their own internal meetings, not for documentation, but as a contingency, a hedge against potential betrayal or public exposure. These recordings, though unofficial, hinted at the possibility of even more dramatic revelations. The knowledge that conversations within the palace might themselves be captured and potentially leaked added a new layer of tension, paranoia, and intrigue. Because the reality was undeniable, the royal family was now operating under a microscope, and the slightest misstep could trigger consequences that would reverberate across the globe. Every decision mattered. Every glance, every word, every internal debate was now part of a complex web of strategy, perception, and potential scandal. And as the family grappled with these pressures, the public remained unaware of just how deep the storm was and how much of what they believed might be manipulated, orchestrated, or entirely false. But even as the palace wrestled with internal strategies, one question loomed larger than any other. Could the family survive this unraveling without irreparable damage? And more importantly, what would happen when Meghan herself decided to act again, leveraging the very evidence that had shaken the family to its core? Because what came next would not just challenge perceptions, it would redefine them entirely. Imagine waking up one morning to discover that the carefully controlled narrative of a family, a monarchy, and an institution you thought untouchable has been shattered overnight. That was the reality on the day the leaks hit. The leaks weren't small whispers, innocuous snippets, or harmless gossip. They were explosive, meticulously curated, and delivered in a way that maximized impact. Every major outlet, every social feed, every morning show around the world buzzed with fragments of a story that no one, not even the royals themselves, could fully contain. The first leak was subtle, but powerful. A photograph, grainy yet unmistakable, appeared online. It wasn't the usual royal portrait, pristine and controlled. This one showed Charles in private, a look of intense worry etched across his face, surrounded by documents that hinted at decisions, instructions, and hidden truths no one outside the inner circle had ever seen. The caption was cryptic: "What the crown won't tell you." Within minutes, thousands were retweeting, sharing, commenting. Within hours, the image had become a global talking point. Then came the documents. Leaked PDFs, scans of handwritten notes, emails, and private memos that revealed strategies, instructions, and decisions previously reserved for palace eyes only. Some outlined public appearances with startling candor, noting how certain family members should appear sympathetic, engaged, or detached, depending on the narrative goal. Others were even more shocking, detailing internal disagreements, secret plans to manage or manipulate public perception, and references to individuals who had been intentionally sidelined. And then, as if orchestrated for maximum drama, the footage was released. Hidden recordings, surveillance-like in their quality, showing private conversations and behind-the-scenes moments. The videos were brief but loaded with context. Charles consulting advisors late at night, Camilla discussing optics with PR teams, William mediating tensions between family factions, Harry, visibly shaken, confronting issues privately that the public would never have imagined. Each clip, each frame, added layers to a narrative that had until now been tightly controlled. The effect was instantaneous. Trust, once implicit, evaporated. What made the leaks particularly devastating was not just their content, but their timing. They appeared over the course of days, strategically spaced to maintain public attention, to prevent the story from fading into background noise. It was as if someone had designed a drip feed, a slow but steady unveiling that ensured maximum engagement and maximum tension. Social media algorithms amplified it, headlines screamed it, and soon the world was obsessed with every detail. But the emotional impact wasn't limited to the public. Within the palace, chaos ensued. Advisors and aides scrambled to identify the source, only to discover that the leaks were coming from multiple, unexpected channels. Some suspected internal dissent, palace staff disillusioned or seeking leverage. Others feared external manipulation, journalists, hackers, or even individuals working directly with Meghan to shape the narrative. The uncertainty bred paranoia. No meeting felt safe. No conversation could be considered private. Every whisper could be recorded, every gesture scrutinized. Prince Harry's reaction was particularly intense. Friends reported that he felt both betrayed and vindicated. On one hand, he was furious that intimate family details had been made public. On the other, he felt a grim sense of relief, because some of the leaks corroborated suspicions he had quietly harbored for years. The sense of betrayal was personal, emotional, and all-consuming. Imagine feeling that your own family had maintained a narrative at your expense, that appearances of care, loyalty, and affection had been carefully choreographed for public consumption. It's a wound that cuts deeper than any public scandal. William, on the other hand, faced a balancing act that tested both his intellect and his emotional resilience. He had to navigate loyalty to his father, the need to protect the family's legacy, and the growing public perception that the monarchy was crumbling from within. Every decision became a calculated risk. Public statements were drafted, revised, and reconsidered. Appearances were rescheduled. The optics of every gesture mattered more than ever, because one misstep could amplify the perception of instability and weaken centuries of institutional authority. Camilla, ever the strategist, recognized the opportunity in the chaos. While the leaks painted her husband in moments of vulnerability, they also exposed the vulnerabilities of others. She began to subtly position herself, ensuring that while the family scrambled, she maintained control over messaging, appearances, and perception. Some insiders suggested that she quietly communicated with media contacts, preparing preemptive narratives that would soften her image and cast her in a stabilizing light. And, as usual, took a methodical approach. She insisted on documenting everything, verifying the leaks, and mapping out their potential consequences. Her team worked tirelessly to cross-reference the documents and footage with existing records, looking for inconsistencies, potential misinterpretations, and threats to the family's reputation. Yet even with her meticulous attention, the emotional toll was apparent. Colleagues noticed dark circles under her eyes, moments of frustration, and a rare vulnerability when she believed no one was watching. The realization was stark. No amount of preparation could fully insulate the family from the fallout. And then came the public reaction. Headlines screamed, social media exploded, and debates raged online. Pundits, commentators, and citizens alike dissected every leaked detail, theorizing motives, predicting consequences, and questioning the integrity of the monarchy itself. Hashtags trended globally, discussions spilled into everyday conversation, and even those previously indifferent to royal affairs suddenly felt compelled to weigh in. It was a frenzy, a tidal wave of scrutiny that even the most seasoned palace advisors could not have anticipated. Yet, despite the frenzy, there was an underlying sense of narrative control from Meghan's camp. While the leaks seemed chaotic, they were released in a manner that suggested strategy, forethought, and timing. Friends of Meghan hinted that the leaks were designed not just to inform, but to destabilize, to provoke reactions, and to shift the balance of power within the royal family. Each release seemed calculated to force responses, create tension, and expose divisions. As the palace worked to respond, they encountered a frustrating reality. Any public statement risked confirming details inadvertently, creating new waves of scrutiny. Silence, on the other hand, invited speculation, assumptions, and accusations. It was a lose-lose scenario, one in which every action carried risk and every inaction carried consequence. Inside the family, the emotional strain was tangible. Harry reportedly confided in close friends that he felt trapped between anger and disbelief. William expressed frustration with the seemingly endless chain reaction of events. And, ever disciplined, worried about the long-term impact on the monarchy. Charles, meanwhile, struggled to reconcile personal shame with public duty. And Camilla, for all her strategy, could not completely shield herself from the emotional and reputational impact. But the leaks did more than just expose facts. They shifted the narrative itself. Suddenly, the public began to question not just individual actions, but the very structure, decisions, and priorities of the royal family. Everything once perceived as stable, traditional, and untouchable was now subject to debate, speculation, and analysis. The monarchy, for the first time in decades, appeared vulnerable, human, and undeniably flawed. The palace's internal response, meanwhile, became a story in itself. Meetings extended late into the night. Security was heightened, surveillance tightened, and trusted aides were monitored. Strategies were drafted, revised, and sometimes abandoned in frustration. And amidst it all, one overarching question remained. Could the family contain the damage, or was this only the beginning of a global revelation that would shake centuries of tradition? Because the truth was inescapable, these leaks weren't random. They weren't careless. They were designed, executed, and timed for maximum effect. And as the world absorbed each new revelation, the royal family had to confront a reality they had long avoided. Control was an illusion, and the next move could change everything, forever. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to have your entire world collapse in a matter of hours? To feel the ground beneath you fracture, not from an earthquake, not from a natural disaster, but from the revelations of those you trusted most? This was the moment Prince Harry had been quietly bracing for his entire life, and yet nothing could have prepared him for the emotional storm that was about to hit. It started with the leaks. At first, Harry tried to brush them off, telling himself this was just the predictable chaos of media frenzy. Royals always face rumors, after all. Scandals come and go. Headlines scream, cameras flash, and the world moves on. But these leaks were different. They weren't anonymous whispers or misquoted statements. They were intimate, precise, and deeply personal. They exposed decisions, conversations, and betrayals that hit closer than the public eye could ever imagine. One document, in particular, tore through his composure like a knife. It outlined directives from Charles himself. Internal instructions that subtly, almost imperceptibly, undermined Harry. The memo detailed expectations, appearances, and roles, but buried within it were lines that read more like judgments. Comments on his unsuitability, reminders of his secondary status, and subtle assertions that his contributions were less valued than those of others. It wasn't overt. It wasn't malicious in tone, but the implications were devastating. To anyone else, these might have seemed like bureaucratic minutiae. To Harry, they confirmed every fear he had buried since childhood. And then there were the videos. Harry watched, frozen, as private conversations he thought were safe were broadcast to the world. Moments of vulnerability, private frustrations, and even jokes were now dissected, replayed, and mocked. He saw himself in a way he had never imagined, exposed, scrutinized, and powerless. Friends reported that he felt stripped of his dignity. Every line spoken, every expression made, suddenly seemed to confirm that his life had been a carefully orchestrated performance, and he was never in control of the script. The emotional weight of these revelations was crushing. Imagine the combination of betrayal, humiliation, and helplessness, magnified by global attention. Harry was forced to confront a painful reality. The family he loved, the institution he respected, and the legacy he cherished were all intertwined in secrets that now lay bare. The very people who should have been allies, confidants, and protectors were revealed to be orchestrators of narratives that marginalized him. It wasn't just the leaks themselves. It was what they revealed about patterns, history, and repeated behaviors. Old letters surfaced, private correspondences between Charles and advisors discussing Harry in terms that were cold, calculating, and strategic. Decisions that once seemed routine. Placement of security, scheduling of appearances, delegation of responsibilities were revealed as part of a meticulous design that subtly, yet consistently, minimized Harry's influence. Every detail that had once seemed trivial now screamed of intentional design. Harry's breaking point came quietly, in a moment alone. He retreated to a secluded wing of his residence, where he could escape the relentless scrutiny of staff, media, and even family. The room was silent. No flashing cameras, no prying eyes, just the weight of truth pressing down, and a silence that magnified every emotion. He replayed conversations in his mind, analyzed encounters, and measured the impact of each revelation. Anger, betrayal, disbelief, and beneath it all, a raw, unfiltered grief that consumed him. Friends described him during this period as distant, volatile, and haunted. There were moments of rage, where he would throw objects in frustration, pacing the room in a storm of emotion. Other times, he would collapse into despair, tears flowing unchecked, grief spilling over the barriers he had spent decades erecting. The public would never see these moments. The cameras were kept at bay, but the emotional toll was immense, and the isolation he felt compounded it. Yet, even amidst the chaos, Harry was not passive. He began to strategize, to consider options, and to contemplate responses that could reclaim agency. Letters were drafted, carefully worded messages intended for private delivery, not public consumption. Conversations with close confidants became meticulous planning sessions. Every potential move, every possible reaction, was weighed against the risks and benefits. He was determined not to let the leaks define him or dictate his next steps. But even in strategy, there was vulnerability. Each decision carried emotional risk, a chance to be further exposed, misunderstood, or betrayed. Friends observed that he oscillated between moments of clarity and episodes of intense doubt. How could he trust anyone? Could he rely on his own judgment after so many years of subtle manipulation? And in the background, the media buzzed relentlessly, interpreting every known fact, every speculation, and every rumor as confirmation of scandal. The psychological strain was compounded by the family dynamics that had long been complicated. William, Charles, Camilla, and each had their own perspectives, agendas, and strategies. Interactions with them were fraught with tension, careful observation, and unspoken assumptions. One simple conversation could trigger multiple layers of calculation, each word weighed for its implication, each gesture analyzed for hidden meaning. Harry had to navigate this minefield while grappling with the personal implications of the leaks. And then came the confrontation. One evening, after a series of particularly inflammatory leaks, Harry confronted Charles directly. The room was charged with tension, the air thick with suppressed emotions. What was said in that conversation is largely unknown to the public, but sources suggest it was a combination of accusation, inquiry, and raw, unfiltered emotion. Harry demanded answers. He needed clarity, resolution, and acknowledgement of the pain he had endured. But what he received in return was a mixture of evasion, justification, and, most devastatingly, confirmation that much of what he had feared was true. It was in that moment, according to insiders, that Harry's composure finally fractured. The prince, who had often been characterized as diplomatic, reserved, and measured, allowed himself to be fully human. The anger, grief, and betrayal that had been simmering under the surface erupted. Words were spoken that would have shocked anyone who thought of Harry as controlled or reserved. The intensity of his emotions, the sheer weight of his humanity, left those present in stunned silence. This breaking point, however, was not merely personal. It had consequences that rippled throughout the palace and beyond. Decisions made in the heat of emotional turmoil influenced subsequent interactions, strategy, and even public perception. The leaks, the betrayal, and the emotional confrontation all converged to create a moment of reckoning. Harry's response would define not only his relationship with the family, but also his role in the narrative that the world was now watching unfold. But in the middle of this emotional storm, another revelation surfaced, a detail so unexpected, so shocking, that it threatened to redefine everything Harry thought he knew. It wasn't a leak, a document, or a video. It was a conversation, whispered in confidence, that connected dots no one else had noticed. It suggested that the intricacies of betrayal, secrecy, and manipulation extended even further than any